My name is Cedric. I'm CEO of cidaas, and I'm responsible for the product development within cidaas as well as the business development. My main target is to develop digitalized and identity-based business models, and I follow our slogan, identity is everything. Today, we want to talk about how we can verify identities, what identity verification processes are out there, and how we implemented them within cidaas to provide a perfect customer journey as well as a perfect employee onboarding. Let's get started. What is a verified identity? Identity is quite clear. Identity consists of several data. First name like Cedric, last name or family name like Wiedmann. I have contact details like my email, my mobile number. I have address data, so the address where I'm living, where I'm working. I have also authentication options that might be old-fashioned. For example, cidaas is great, or it might be more innovative authentication methods like device biometrics or FIDO2. Additionally, we also have an identity status. So if my identity is verified, maybe details about the verification status, so like an ID card number and more. So we have especially one more attribute or a group of attributes which help us to determine if a user is verified, if we know it's exactly the same user in the real world as well as in the digital world. Normal identities we know from all the different services what we utilize. For example, in car rental, where we sign up online, rent a car. If we go to Netflix, watch a movie. So all the streaming services, be it video-based, be it audio-based, we have a user and an identity there. We have it with our retail companies, online shops, local retail stores. We have an identity with Facebook, Google, so the social logins or platforms in general. We also have an identity or a user with banks. And there are billions of users out there and billions of digital services out there, what we can utilize. A few of these services, as mentioned, need just the user details like first name, birth date, address, or contact details. I can also verify the contact details. For example, I can send a verification mail to verify the email address. I can also send SMS verification to verify the mobile number or do an IVR process. So I can verify certain attributes of a user to ensure the user is, or parts of the data is correct. What I can't do, focusing on several use cases, what I have here, I see, for example, use cases like car rental, Netflix, or bank, where an additional verification of certain attributes is required. For example, taking a bank use case into account, opening a bank account, I need to verify my real-world identity. So I need to showcase my ID card. That's a process which is regulatory required. I maybe have same requirements with less priority in streaming services for watching certain kinds of videos, for example. And I have other use cases where it's interesting to have at least the details, for example, in the car rental process. In the car rental itself, it's quite interesting to get not only the proof that's the right person, but to extract details from the ID card, for example, the types of vehicles the user or the person is allowed to drive. So I can extract different data from different types of ID cards to verify certain aspects in my use case. For example, in the bank account, I need to verify the complete identity with the address where I'm living. When I want to open a bank account, I need to verify it's a real world identity, need to have the match, need to save these details out of regulatory reasons. In Netflix, it's only interesting to have age borders or different stages to allow different types of videos to watch. In the car rental process, it might be also interesting to have in the contract process a real world identity, but more interesting is also to have the different vehicle types. Obviously, for all the other use cases, a verified identity would be also interesting. So if you have a loyalty use case, it's quite interesting to know it's a real world identity and to verify it's really the real person behind that and not fake data. But there is no regulatory requirement behind that, so no hard requirement behind that. So with the ID verification, I'm now able to not only verify contact details like email and SMS, I'm also able to verify email and mobile number. I'm also able to verify the user details. So, for example, my first, last name, my birth date. I'm also able to verify address data, like required in the context of bank account opening or applying for a loan. In these use cases, I can also verify the address details available on the ID card. In that context, the question arises, how does a user verify its identity? So in that context, especially how the ID verification process is done. There are different processes available. For example, video agent-based processes, where I talk with a video agent, showcase my ID document, and have a talk with them to illustrate that I'm a live person, show the holograms, as well as other security features, and that takes maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. I also have the local-based approach, where I visit the local store or branch of the company requesting the ID verification. For example, in the context of opening a bank account, moving to the local branch of the bank, showcasing my ID documents there. The same can also be done via postal offices in many countries today. There are also other approaches like NFC-based approaches. Now let's have a look what documents I can utilize. Each of the different processes have different advantages and disadvantages. I have currently a standard set of ID documents, what many people have. That's a passport, ID document, as well as a driver license. Some of these ID documents might have, for example, NFC technologies already included, like the ID card. Others, like a driver license, might not have that. That leads to the fact that some ID documentation or verification processes are not possible to utilize for all different ID documents. I also have further ID document types, for example, like a university card, like a birth certificate or a green card, which don't have any of these options, like NFC technologies, QR codes or barcodes or anything else. So especially visual-based processes like video-based or auto-ident-based processes where the video is analyzed by artificial intelligence are more useful because the diversity of the documents what I can analyze is much bigger. That leads us to the cidaas ID validator. So how we do the ID verification at cidaas. In this video, we'll showcase how the ID verification is done with cidaas. In the first step, we'll illustrate the face, so showing the face into the camera. We analyze liveness detection, register the face, and do also video streaming processing here to detect different images of the face to later do a comparison to a real person. We'll give some hints during the process and then switch directly into showing the ID card. We shift the document a little bit, tile it to showcase all the different security features and extract all the details. So here the ID document details like first name, last name of a German ID card were extracted. We also detect what type of ID document it is. So there we'll do a shift then to the back side because an ID card in Germany has a front and a back side. If it would be a German passport, it would be just a one-step scanning of the passport. So the artificial intelligence process is quite intelligent. So we do it in a smart way. We first detect the face, detect if the lighting is proper, if the camera quality is sufficient, and then we move to the next step, scan the ID documents, extract all the details, extract the security features, and then do a comparison of the face to detect if it's the same person doing the process as well as the same person on the ID document. The process in general, at what we have seen now, took around a minute. In average, we have 1 to 1.5 minutes for ID cards, so front and back side. For normal passports, we have a little less because it's just one step, not a two-step process for scanning an ID document. So we are much faster than normal video-based processes. So with a video agent behind that, which maybe takes 10, 15, 20 minutes. The reason behind that is because we can analyze all the security features coming in parallel, which in comparison to that, a video agent-based process has a checkbox where he goes through all the security features he wants to check, all the data he wants to extract, what an artificial intelligence process is doing by himself. So we start with the face scan, have then the ID card scan, front and back side, and then we have a sufficient result and get the feedback that the ID verification was successful and we have a proven ID record of this user. That's simple, convenient for onboarding users in the customer journey, so opening a bank account, closing an insurance, but also for onboarding employees, as we will see later. The complete process is eIDAS certified. So eIDAS is the European regulation for ID verification, or in general for ID verification processes. During last year, the eIDAS regulation was adapted so that auto-ident-based processes like we offer it with the cidaas ID validator are possible to utilize. And so since then, we are certified for ID verification processes within the European Union. But let's have a look again at the benefits of an auto-ident-based process like a cidaas ID validator, which makes users happy, versus other ID verification processes which users makes angry. It all starts with the customer experience. A good or bad customer experience is in most cases a decision factor why a solution is utilized or not utilized. The cidaas ID validator, in comparison to other solutions, offers a fast and short process, so 1 minute compared to maybe 10-20 minutes. We also support mostly all documents since it's a visualized based process, so I don't need NFC technologies or other technologies to extract the user details. And most important, or one of the most important things, I can do it anytime and anywhere. Since it's a machine-based, artificial intelligence-based process, I can do it in the night at 2 a.m. in the morning, I can do it at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, anytime, and I can do it anywhere with my mobile device. I don't need a video agent waiting for me, doing the process with me. I don't need a local branch, which only has open like 10 hours a day, where I need to visit the store when I do it in the night and the next morning. I can just do it at any time when I want to do it. And a really important step is a do-it-yourself process. So I don't need personal contact to anyone. That's one of the biggest feedbacks or most crucial feedbacks what we have gotten from testers and customers up to now. So when I want to open a bank account, I normally myself sit at 10 p.m. in the evening on my couch, opening a bank account, searching for a car rental, things like that. So I'm not at 2 p.m. in the afternoon in office, dressed perfectly, able to have a call with a video agent. I normally sit at home, easy, watch a movie, in parallel searching for a car or new bank account, new credit card, whatever. Then I don't want to talk with a person myself. So then an automatic process which I can do by myself is more interesting. We can even extend the cidaas ID validator by not only having only the ID verification, I can also use it to build up a complete digital sales process with signing of contracts in the end, so a qualified electronic signature to also sign documents, for example, for bank account opening, home loan, car rental, all the processes can be achieved here. Therefore, after the ID verification, directly following on that, the user gets the documents to read them and he can sign them with, for example, an OTP code via mobile number. We talked quite a lot about customer journey, customer use cases, where especially B2C or B2B use cases, company wants to get customers or partners onboarded. Now we want to have a better perspective of ID verification context of B2B, especially also in the B2E sector, so onboarding of employees to the company. In that use case, as mentioned, we have seen bank account opening, we have seen car rental, and we have seen insurance use cases, for example, for signing an insurance, but there are also other use cases. So first day at a job. So at the first day at a job, I don't know what I should do or if I should do anything, and I'm afraid to ask. And what the onboarding changed quite heavily mostly in the last 2 years. During the COVID pandemic, the onboarding was changed from offline onboarding when users or employees visit the local store, local office of a company, get onboarded, get the training there, get all the authentication details like password, username, email, all the access details what are required here, as well as all the compliance processes done. During the pandemic, the offline onboarding was not possible since the local offices were closed. So companies needed to start to do an online onboarding. There it gets hard, because how should I pass a password to a new employee if I do not see him? In that process, so the home office use case, it became quite important to find ways to identify users who are not visible in the local office. So with the ID verification of employees which are remote, I can perform different activities afterwards. So after the ID verification, I can directly let the employee configure his authentication options. That might be a password, like cidaas is great, and it might be also multi-factor authentication options following on that. I also have the option to give access to sensitive data. For example, to confidential documents, I can secure them by really having an ID verification in between and verifying the user accessing the confidential documents is really the user who he claims to be. And I can also do compliance processes. So instead of seeing the person in real life, inviting him to do a compliance process to know he conducted it really, I can also do compliance processes on the online world now, because I can verify the user identity and then let him follow up the compliance process. So I can do a complete onboarding of employees sitting remote via an online onboarding process by verifying the identity in the beginning, ensuring it's the user he claims to be, then letting the user configure his authentication options, running through the compliance processes, as well as access sensitive or confidential data. Current processes what companies implemented are, for example, sending a letter home. 2 or 3 days later, he got a code with which he can configure his first password, things like that. That all changes because I can anytime, anywhere allow an onboarding of people all over the world. I also can use that for partner onboarding. If I take, for example, insurance or banks, they are not only active themselves, especially in insurance use cases. I have salespersons out there selling documents, selling insurances for them. So in that use case, I can allow a partner onboarding. I can not only allow the customer to onboard himself and do a digital sales process, I can also allow partners to onboard, to verify it's them, and allow them to sign a partner contract and then continue and be active as my salesperson, external one. So how does the cidaas ID validator as ID verification product now correlate with cidaas as an identity and access management platform? So let's have a look at how ID verification as part of the identity management is important. In cidaas, we move from the weak to the strong identity. So in the beginning, I have the option to verify, for example, contact details via email. I can let the user enter details like address, his user details, his first name, last name. I can maybe also verify the address details a little bit, that it's a real address. And via the complete customer journey or also employee journey, I step by step enrich the customer profile or the user profile in the context of an employee use case and allow the user to add further details. For example, starting with just an email, then extending it with first name, last name in an online shop, then later maybe providing address details as a delivery address. So step by step enriching the profile from a weak to a strong identity, when finally the strongest version of an identity is the ID verification. So the cidaas ID validator fits perfectly into the complete user journey because it allows finally to also enrich the user by an identity status and prove that it's a real user. What you should take out of the last 10 to 20 minutes of that call. First, the ID verification is an essential part of the user data. Since with that, we can verify the user is a real user, we can verify certain user attributes. We have seen that not only regulatory use cases are there, but there are also other use cases which might require an ID verification. For example, car rental to identify the vehicles the user is allowed to drive, or in Netflix, the age verification. And one important thing, ID verification is user-friendly. So it's really used if it's user-friendly. So only if we do the customer experience in a good way, like providing a user or ID verification process with 1 or 2 minute process time instead of 10 to 20 minutes, convenient circumstances, anytime, anywhere, and do-it-yourself approach. So not sitting there talking with a real person, doing it in the night, not going to a local branch. Only then the ID verification itself is used by users and customers. That's it for today's webinars. Thank you for joining, and now we have time for some questions. How many nations do you support in regard to verify standard identity verification documents, as well as the, so for example, France, Turkey, Russian ID cards or driver license? We currently support more than 200 different documents in roughly 50 to 60 countries, so mainly European Union as well as neighboring countries there. We also have the option to train new ID documents within 3 days. That's especially important to get fast new documents live for new countries, what we onboard in our ID validator solution, as well as having a look at the changes in the ID documents done by the different countries. We also got one more question. What certification do you have regarding signature, qualified electronic signature, cidaas, and cidaas? So the ID validator is, so the ID verification processes is done by cidaas. For the qualified electronic signature, we have different partners who are certified for qualified electronic signature, which we integrate easily with. Also, the example what you have seen now is, for example, with the German Bank Verlag, who provide a solution there. We also have other solutions integrated already and can easily utilize them. There's also a conformity test done to connect all the different solutions. So not only cidaas ID verification, but also qualified electronic signature as a complete solution there. What about retailers like Edeka when their customers want to buy restricted items with a self-checkout? That's, for example, also a comparable use case. That's a good idea, a good use case to showcase non-regulatory or not highly regulatory use cases like opening a bank account. In a self-checkout, you could provide the option that they can verify their identity by an ID card. You can also match the user with the person buying the stuff, so the ID document card, and the person buying the stuff to ensure that restricted items cannot be sold to anyone else. Is there a possibility to test it? Yes. Thanks for asking that. Following on that webinar, you all will receive an email with a link where you can test the cidaas ID validation processes without signature, just ID verification processes with German documents. So feel free to test it. And which languages are supported? So we support currently between 50 and 60 languages. So the countries which we also support, and we can easily add further languages or easily add further languages by just translating them, or can do this jointly with customers who require an additional language. Since I think these are all the questions, if I didn't miss anything, there's just someone typing. So there was one more question, which frameworks are supported? Not exactly sure what with the frameworks you mentioned, or what frameworks you mean. In that context, framework, so cidaas ID validator itself is built on, is developed by cidaas based on a Python and Ray cluster, what we're utilizing here. Additionally, the cidaas ID validator is API based, so you can easily integrate it into any solution by yourself. We also provide SDKs for common frameworks and languages, like for example, if you want to integrate it in their mobile apps, iOS, Android, and more. So, taking a chance before the tool stops again, thank you for joining today's webinar, and hopefully see you soon. You will receive a mail following to this webinar with the details to test it yourself. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to continue the discussion. Thanks, and see you soon. Bye-bye.